everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. And today we are doing something we have not done for a long time. Talking about Reddit drama, but there's a good reason for it, I promise, because this is not just about some crazy story and how wild it is, but how the general internet's reaction to the story tells us a lot about where we are at with acceptance of polyamorous people and alternative relationships more broadly. So, what's been going on? Believe it or not, this story is from way back in 2016. That's right, this all happened 8, almost 9 years ago, and for some reason, it's recently been resurrected. A person made a post on r/polyamory with the title, "Wife wants to have a baby with only one person in our relationship. I don't want it to happen." You can see how this might have blown up the way that it did with a title like that. We've already discussed once before on this channel how anything involving polyamorous people having kids tends to rile people up, whether or not it's warranted. But before I ramble too much on that, let's get into the actual post, which begins, quote, "Short version of the story. I've been in a 5-way poly-ish relationship for many years. Wife wants to have a kid with one specific person, and I don't really like him. Not sure how to put my foot down without seeming like a controlling jerk." Longer version. My wife, 34 female, Lori, and I, 35 male, have been together for 16 years and married for 13, and our relationship has been open since the day we met in college. About 8 years ago, we met another couple, Kyle, 34 male, and ANDI, 33 female, who were also open and poly, and we hit it off right away. In 2012, ANDI got pregnant, and after a bit of math, we realized that I was probably the father. After discussing our future, we had a commitment ceremony in July 2012 and have all been a family ever since. When that occurred, ANDI already had one baby with Kyle, and Lori had 2 by me. On the periphery of all of this was Joseph, 34 male. Joseph and Kyle have been friends since college, and Joseph, Kyle, and ANDI have been in an intermittent sexual relationship since then. There was never anything serious there, but he was a regular third man in their threesomes.
Hi everyone, Evie here, and I am so excited to announce that I am once again working with Beducated. If you haven't heard of them before, Beducated is an online learning platform dedicated to providing practical, accessible education about sex, pleasure, and relationships. Their site has over 100 courses, and there's something for everyone, no matter your existing skill level or goals. Just getting started on your journey? Beducated has advice for improving your dirty talk, foreplay, and communication techniques. Are you ready to start exploring polyamory or maybe an open relationship in the new year? Learn how to approach your new relationship style in a healthier way than the subjects of today's video with classes on things like threesomes, navigating non-monogamy, and even what to do when you start falling in love with a new person while in a relationship. And for the kink curious among you, they've got dozens of options, including several classes on bondage, playing rough, spanking, and wax play. And Beducated has really impressed me with their courses on navigating the intersection of disability, chronic pain, and sex. So, make 2025 the year you finally build the life and relationships you've always wanted and that you deserve. Beducated can help you make that possible with their Say Yes to Pleasure in 2025 campaign. Right now, for a limited time, use my code EVIELUPINE, that's EVIELUPINE at checkout to get an extra 10% off their already half off yearly pass. That's right. For only $6.67 a month, you can access all the courses I just mentioned and more. But this 60% off deal won't last forever, so don't miss out. Help support the channel and get access to some amazing education while you're at it. There's even a 24-hour free trial and a risk-free 2-week money-back guarantee in case you don't love it, but I'm sure that you will. So again, that's code EVIELUPINE, EVIELUPINE, for 60% off at checkout on Beducated using the code in the description box. Now, back to the video.
Okay, so far, this is not sounding like the worst thing in the world. We have a few people who found each other and have all been polyamorous from the very beginning. They're in their 30s now, they're maybe a little bit more mature, and they have been doing this for over 15 years. This isn't the typical midlife crisis-fueled, "Help, my husband said he wants to open our relationship after 20 years of monogamous marriage so he can date his secretary I caught him cheating on me with" disaster you normally hear about on social media. If I had to guess right now, though, I'd bet this Joseph guy is going to be the problem in this story, but on that note, I should probably mention that you should take every story you hear on Reddit with a giant grain of salt, maybe even a whole canister of it, including this one, which I certainly am. Reddit is kind of an odd website for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones is that it is full of people using every advice and story sharing subreddit for creative writing projects or just to troll sometimes. Reddit is also one of the few places on the internet where you can go to get decent consumer reviews for everything from vacuum cleaners to makeup. And people tend to be very honest with that part of the website. So it's a very strange dichotomy. Most of the reviews are relatively unbiased compared to the rest of the internet where companies pay for reviews for basically anything. But many, if not most, of the stories on it are totally fake. So with that in mind, let's continue with our skepticism hats firmly on. After the commitment ceremony, Joseph occasionally joined all of us for bedroom fun, but it was again an intermittent thing and nothing serious, so it wasn't a huge surprise when Andy's baby turned out to be Joseph's and not mine. It was still a surprise, but it wasn't a problem. The baby was welcomed into our family, and Joseph became a more regular guest in our home. About a year after the baby was born, a few things happened that seriously changed things. First, both Andy and Lori got pregnant again. As we'd later learn, Andy's baby really was mine this time around, and Lori's baby is Kyle's. Okay, so starting to get a sense of why exactly this story rubbed people the wrong way. So based on what I've heard so far, I would call this a polyfidelous relationship. That is a closed, non-monogamous relationship where new partners are not being brought in, people don't necessarily date outside of the group, and it consists of the same members in a relatively stable fashion, even if maybe all of them don't have a similar level of commitment. If I had to guess, though, this part is probably flying over folks' heads, and they probably can't imagine how it could ever possibly be healthy to have that many people all having unprotected sex with each other without birth control, presumably, to the point that it's not always clear immediately who the father of each child is. That, I am sure, makes people think this whole dynamic is disgusting and gross on its face because it totally is outside of our social expectations that, people are supposed to have children with one person ever in a closed, married, monogamous relationship because, you love each other and having a child is a expression of your perfect love, But that doesn't always happen that way for monogamous people. But willingly letting your spouse have kids with someone else right in front of you has to be very triggering for people. And I mean that, seriously, not in a, oh, you're being triggered, snowflake, SJW kind of way, but, actually triggering. But just because it doesn't conform to our social expectations doesn't mean that way of having and raising a family is bad or wrong, so long as everyone involved wants that to be happening and consents to it. So, if you're experiencing a big reaction to the story so far, just keep that in mind and just monitor it as we go along, because I think that is potentially going to cause a lot of bias to crop up here. Shortly after that, Joseph was involved in a very serious motorcycle accident. He was hospitalized for nearly 2 months, lost his job, lost his apartment, and needed a lot of help. We ended up moving him in as a, quote, temporary thing to help him out. That was a year and a half ago. He's still here. Kyle is happy to have his old friend around all the time. The women both like him a lot. The sex is great between all of them, etc. 3 days ago, Lori was hinting around that she needed to talk about something serious, but didn't know how to broach it. After a bit of discussion, it came out. She wants to have one more baby. And not just anyone's baby. She wants to have Joseph's baby. She wants to go off the pill and have Kyle and I either abstain from having sex with her or to have only condom-protected sex until Joseph gets her pregnant. When I asked her why, she just shrugged her shoulders and said that she loved him too and that it was only fair. She said that ANDI had a child by each of the three of us and that she wanted to have a child by each of us too. After a bit more discussion, it came out that the idea was his and that he was feeling, quote, left out because he didn't have a child with her. Putting aside the childish notion that babies should be created solely to placate someone's sense of fairness, I have a few serious problems with this. First, we already have 6 kids in the house, which is already a bit much at times. I thought we were all done having kids, and I'm not sure I really want any more. Second, there is no commitment to Joseph. Where the rest of us have gone through a commitment ceremony to join ourselves to each other, he hasn't. But the biggest is also the simplest. I don't really like the guy. Never have. He's got this odd vibe and has always struck me a bit untrustworthy. He honestly reminds me of a shady used car salesman. He also drinks too much, is a bit of a bigot, and has a personality that I find grating. I didn't object to him hanging around now and then because he was Kyle's friend, and I didn't have a problem with the sex because it was just sex, and I understood the history of their relationship, but now I'm wishing that I had. To be honest, I've long hoped that he'd meet someone who wasn't into polyamory just to get him out of our sex lives and relationship. When he moved in after the accident, I kept my mouth shut because they were just trying to be helpful, and discussions about his long-term plans have always alluded to the idea that he'd be moving out again someday. When he'd really annoy me, I tell myself that it was just temporary. Now I'm facing the possibility that this guy is going to be around forever. Ah, there it is. I knew that Joseph was going to be the source of issues here. And I have to say, I am with OP at this point. Having kids with someone to make things even or fair is wild. It would be wild to do this in a monogamous relationship. Like, imagine a scenario where a 50-year-old divorcee with 3 teenage children gets remarried to a 28-year-old, and then in order to make things fair, she insists after getting married, she should also get to have 3 kids, so that way she's even with the ex-wife. That would not be a good plan. And this does happen. At least in theoretical Reddit land, I have heard a version of a scenario like that several times. But, no one ever blames the monogamy when that happens, though I know without even looking that people are going to blame the polyamory for this part of the relationship. But to be honest, I think the having a kid part is not even necessarily the real problem. It's the lack of clear communication between the partners. The OP seems to be under the impression that Joseph is not a committed member of the polycule and is just around for sex, but it seems like OP's partner, Lori, loves him. Like, maybe not, in love, but, loves him. I don't know, maybe they're the kind of people who, love their friendly, non-committed sex partners, but is that common? I don't think so. And I wonder if it's really all just on Joseph and if there's not some kind of competition between Lori and ANDI with the two of them wanting to be even and Joseph just kind of being there to facilitate that. Something is not adding up right now, but holy crap, it should not have to be stated that having a, let's call it a pity child, is a bad idea. If this is your attitude towards children, you should not be having children, in my humble opinion. Why, dear God, why would you think about kids that way? I don't know. It's not a polyamory problem. If this person was monogamous, there's a lot of monogamous people that think that way about kids. And some of us know that because we come from families where that's the attitude, right? Yeah. Kyle and ANDI love the idea and think that Lori having Joseph's baby is romantic. Lori's looking to cement some kind of bond to him. I, on the other hand, seem to get angrier and angrier every time I see him, almost violently angry. I want to chase this guy out of our home and never let him in again. I want to punch him square in his smug face. I temporarily tolerated someone that I disliked because I wanted to be generous and helpful, and because he's the father of one of Andy's children. Now, because I didn't want to be a dick and consign a disabled man to homelessness, he's worked his way into our relationship and seems quite content to stay there forever. If this pregnancy happens, I know he'll never move out. How do I even begin to approach this? I don't really care if Joseph gets hurt in this, but every other solution seems to lead to the other people in my family being miserable, them being angry with me, or me living in silent misery. I can't see any way to resolve this that doesn't involve hurting those I love or hurting myself. Does anyone have any insights or suggestions? I don't want to lose this wonderful family that we've built, but every route I see seems to do it harm. What do you do when every other member of your family wants to include a new person into the family and you don't? And whew, my heart really, really hurts here. It seems like everyone else in his family is on a different page than the OP is, and they didn't let him know. Like, what was that about everyone agreeing to it being temporary and talking about him moving out eventually, but then they seemingly changed their minds about it and then are talking as though, like, obviously he's going to be allowed to stay here because, like, he's talking about having a kid with one of the women in this family. Did they just not talk about things? I hope you all are getting the sense by now that the issue here was made worse by not making things clear as a group like yesterday. Like, I just know that if a husband in a polycule moved in a sex partner who had an injury, promising it was temporary, only to announce a year and a half in they were now going to start trying for a baby and they were in love, people would instantly clock that as manipulative at best and call it out. And it might sound a little weird to say this, but based on the info we have, I think this might be the problem it is because of their lack of experience in polyamory. I mean, think about it. They're both long-term couples who found each other and fused into a big family unit, 8 years ago. And if they did any outside dating in that time, it wasn't important enough to mention. The only more permanent outside party was Joseph. It's sort of functionally like being in a nearly decade-long marriage, just with 4 people altogether, that happens to include a presumably sex-only side piece. That is not exactly the same kind of communication gauntlet that a more open non-monogamous relationship would have, and I could see how the people involved would fall into the same trap so many couples do, regardless of if they're non-monogamous or not. The, "Oh, I thought you knew. I thought it was obvious" trap, aka the "I didn't think you needed to know about that" trap. When conversations are potentially complex, people tend to avoid them. No matter if it's talking about which parents to go visit for the holidays, or if you've caught feelings for the guy who's just supposed to be friends with benefits. And at the same time, OP likely could have done a way better job softly expressing his dislike of Joseph and checking in, hey, it's been 6 months, it's been a year, what's our plan for Joseph moving out? Because this can be an issue of inertia where, oh yeah, it'll happen eventually, one day, we don't want to rush things, and then suddenly it takes 2 years, 3 years, and you've never actually talked about it. If somebody is supposed to become independent eventually, assuming that he's in a state where he can do that, there should be benchmarks, there should be a timeline of like, okay, we're going to start helping him look for an apartment, we're going to help him do work retraining, we're going to help him find a job, we're going to help him with his resume, like we're going to do things, put things in place timeline-wise, and not just say, oh, well, he can't be here for forever, right? Like, that's not going to happen. Well, when you do nothing, that is exactly what's going to happen. So, yeah, that needed to be more of a conversation as opposed to just, brushing it off. Because if you're getting signs over and over and over again that a thing you expected to happen isn't happening, it is your responsibility to check in on that and make it a conversation and force people to put down some gosh darn details. And I know that people hate having to set out very clear things like that sometimes, but when it comes to a whole person moving into your house, again, if this was like a mother-in-law, right? You have a married couple who's been independent, the husband is like the mother-in-law, classic scenario, and the mother-in-law moves in because, she has an accident or something and, needs help doing daily life things for a little while. And then she gets better, but she still stays. And in that scenario, it's also very easy for a married monogamous couple to just go, oh, but she's our, she's my mother. She's, the grandparent to our children. Like, she should get to stay as long as she wants. Like, she'll leave when she's ready. And then suddenly it's been 5 years and she's like more moved in than ever. Have to come up with solid plans sometimes. Sometimes it's good to be a little more loosey-goosey. This is not one of those times. But moving on, the next day, OP posted an update, which read, quote, wow, where to begin? We had the discussion this morning, and it went about as poorly as expected. I began by clearing the air about my feelings for Joseph. I reminded everyone that he and I have never got along, and that I've always viewed his presence in our home as a temporary thing. I told them all that I still view it as a temporary thing, and that I can't support any moves to make his presence in our home more permanent. That's when Kyle and ANDI dropped a bombshell. Following Lori's announcement a few days ago, they had been talking about asking Joseph to join our family formally through a commitment ceremony to make him a permanent part of our household. They were apparently going to bring it up with me today. I reminded them that, as part of our original commitment, we'd agreed that any additions to our family had to be done unanimously, and made it very clear that I'd never agree to that. My statement led to a huge argument, which included them calling me, quote, selfish, and the statement that the three of them could hold a commitment ceremony without me. I didn't want to go there, but I shut that down by saying, understand that? If you do that, you're not talking about adding someone new to the family. You're talking about replacing me with him. I can't stay in a family that would hurt and disrespect me that way. That led to even more arguing that didn't have any real conclusion. That's when I turned to Lori. I told her that I loved her and that it broke my heart that she wanted to have a child with someone I couldn't stand. I also told her that I found it offensive that he'd ask her to have a child to placate his own ego, but that I thought the request was fairly consistent with his lack of character. I reminded her that a child is not an object to be traded off for affection or love, and that they should only be created as an expression of that love. I told her, without any hesitation, that having a child with Joseph would irrevocably change our relationship and drive a wedge between us. She would be choosing his happiness over mine, and that's how relationships end. She was crying the whole time, and when I was done, she called me selfish and mean. She told me that she loved us both and that she doesn't want to choose between us. She flat out said that she wanted to have one more baby, that she'd already talked to Joseph about it, and that she wasn't going to, quote, go back on her word. She then offered to get rid of the exclusive part, saying that she was willing to go off of the pill and have sex with both of us, letting fate decide the baby's paternity. I told her this was unacceptable, reminded her that I'm her husband and family, and he is not, and said that in not making a decision, she was actually making a choice. I told her that I'd be more than willing to have another child with her, but that having a child with Joseph would be the end of us. And then I went to work. The discussion didn't really change anything or lead to any firm decisions, but the information is now out there, and everyone knows where everyone else stands. We'll see where everything goes from here. And that's the whole update. I wanted to say all of that in full without any interjections from me because, well, you just heard it. That's quite the story. The fact that Kyle and ANDI were talking about including Joseph in their family via commitment ceremony without including OP, who is presumably a core part of that family, like, what is the purpose of a commitment ceremony if as part of that you're not including them in conversations about further commitment ceremonies? Like, no. That is not how even kitchen table poly on this level is supposed to work. And the fact that no one seems to take OP's feelings about this guy seriously. Like, remember, he also said that he was kind of a bigot. Like, what does that mean? What's that? Can we unpack that? Why is everyone okay with the bigot? In what way? Is he, like, a little homophobic in, like, a 90s way? Is he, like, does he think that trans people don't exist? Like, is he super racist? Why are we even allowing a presumably bigoted person into a family life with a bunch of kids that he could potentially influence? Assuming that that is not just OP's own bias speaking and that Joseph is genuinely bigoted, I would have, like, this is just me, I am a very value-based person. I cannot long-term partner with people that I don't have shared values with. And if my partner had a very committed partner who is super bigoted to the point that I couldn't get along with them because of it, like, it would make me not like my partner, regardless of the feelings about the metamor, you know? Like, I would love to dig into that a little bit more, but we didn't really get any details about that part. We haven't really heard a lot from Joseph in this conversation. Like, is Joseph even polyamorous? Does he want to be poly? Or is he here because this is his current best option? I feel like that is what we need to know here, because my gut feeling is that Joseph is just like some guy and he's not actually non-monogamous, and because of that he thinks that somehow a child will make him feel more included in this scenario, when that's very much not actually going to be something he wants long-term at all. And also, he already has a child with one of the other women, and again, oh my god, why on God's green earth are we talking about creating a whole human being as though it's a promise that you can't back out of? Like, this is not like, oh, promising your parents you're gonna go to dinner with them next weekend. Like, this is a whole human life. What are you doing? What are you doing? Ah! Like, also, what kind of person are you if you think you have to have a kid because one time you promised somebody that you would? That's definitely a breakable promise if it's not feeling totally the right time and scenario to do that in. I just feel like there's something still we don't really know about here, but there is one final update left to go. So let's talk about that, because it might have some answers. Maybe not, but hopefully it will. Quote, "A lot has happened. Some genuinely surprised me, and it looks like my family will be changing a bit, but things appear to be settling down. I should mention that this will be my last update. I mentioned to Lori that I'd been discussing our situation on the Reddit Poly group, and she wanted to read it. After bawling her eyes out as she read through it, she apologized to me for everything, and we spent all night together. No sex, just holding each other all night. This morning, she asked me to not discuss this anymore until we get everything worked out, but said I could post one final update. So, where to begin? First, Joseph is moving out. Yep, it actually happened. And the shocking thing? It was his idea. He finally demonstrated some of that nice guy personality to me that I've never been able to connect with. Wait, what? Something good might be happening in an update to a Reddit advice question? Never thought I would see the day. Maybe OP finally got to see the side of Joseph that everyone else got to see but him. I do wonder why Joseph would decide to move out, though. Like, was it really his idea, or does he feel forced out? Let's find out. Quote, "I knew that Joseph would be home when I returned from work yesterday, and I was honestly expecting the worst. I was sure that someone would have clued him in on our conversation and expected him to react with his usual asshole persona. It didn't happen. Instead, a few minutes after I came home, Joseph walked into my room and asked me to join him in the backyard for a conversation. I was expecting a fistfight, but got an apology instead. He admitted that we'd never got along, and admitted that he'd never liked me either, but said that he didn't feel right about coming between me and Lori. He went on to talk about how happy his son is in our family, and how he didn't want to destroy that family. At the same time, he talked about how much he loved living with his son, and how he didn't really want to go back to only seeing him once a week. I'd never thought about that. In the end, he proposed a solution that I accepted. There's a nice apartment complex about 2 blocks from our house, and he wants to get an apartment there when he lands a job. He's pretty good at what he does, and already has some job leads, so he anticipates that'll happen pretty soon. He can visit our house whenever he wants during the week, I'm at work anyway, and can spend up to 2 nights a week at my house to be closer with his kid. If he does it right, that means he could still potentially see his son 7 days a week, while I only have to deal with him for 2. It's a great solution that gives us both what we want. Wait. Oh my god. Is that right? Am I hearing this correctly? Does that mean a bunch of adults actually came together and made an acceptable solution based on compromise in an extremely volatile scenario? maybe there is some hope for humanity. I hadn't thought before while reading this, how Joseph has this kid with ANDI, and that by not being there in the polycule, his visitation with the kid would be more limited. Of course, I don't really know how they came up with that arrangement in the first place. I assumed they maybe had some kind of split custody agreement thing already. Him wanting to be around his existing child is a good thing, but then what's missing here is, why was he all about trying to have another kid? Where did that idea come from? Because he didn't talk about that part. Is that still the time to the polycule more? That's not a great reason to have a kid still, so don't know what's going on there, but continuing. He's also already told Lori that he doesn't want to have a baby with her, so that's now off the table. He actually admitted that he wanted to have a baby with Lori, but said that he didn't want to stick her into the middle of a conflict over it. And then we had a beer together. I didn't even complain when he handed me one of his Coors Lights. Totally not kidding, this guy really does fit certain stereotypes. My low opinion of the guy went up a notch. Straight male bonding. Never change. The fact Joseph was able to do the responsible thing in this scenario, above and beyond his own wants and desires, is a good sign that maybe he won't be so bad to have around more often. Still wondering about the bigotry thing, but again, hope in humanity slightly restored so far. And there's still more, if you can believe it. Quote, as for Lori, she was a tearful mess for most of the day, apparently, and Joseph taking the baby off the table was fairly devastating for her. After I got home and we talked a bit, she unloaded her soul and let me know just how much she wants another baby and how much it hurt her that neither Kyle or myself want one with her. And then she felt even more hurt when neither one of us even clued in on her level of hurt over it. After several hours of talking, we came to an agreement. We are going to have one more baby, but we'll wait another year for it. And, interestingly, she wants it to be mine, not Kyle's or Joseph's. Kyle apparently doesn't have a problem with that at all. So, what about her relationship with Joseph? Well, here's where polyamory and open relationships can get complicated. As though up to this point the story wasn't complicated. The commitment ceremony is off the table, but she still wants to date him and have some sort of a relationship with him. No babies, no pregnancy, just love and sex now and then. She won't ever sleep with him when he's staying over at our house, but she'll still be going out on dates with him, visiting him at his place from time to time, and we'll be staying overnight on occasion, maybe once a month. While I have to admit, and I'm still not totally thrilled with that, it's really just going back to the relationship they had before he moved in with us. I'll tolerate it for her happiness. Hey y'all, Editing Evie here. So I just needed to pop in because while I was reviewing this, it really just struck me again how little all of this makes sense. In terms of how people actually feel about each other, I just cannot comprehend having a relationship with someone where at one point I was considering having a child with them and then going back to being fine with what I would consider to be entry-level new partner date nights where the other person isn't even allowed to come over and have sex in the same house that you share with another partner. That seems a little odd to me, and it increasingly seems to me as I'm rereading this now that Lori didn't even really necessarily want a baby with Joseph. She was just hurt that Kyle and her spouse didn't want to have a baby with her, so he was kind of the best available option, which if you'd already had an agreement with your spouse and your committed life partner about, hey, we're done with our family size now, this is it, going back around to a third guy to be oh, do you want to have a baby with me? Because neither one of my other partners want to have more kids. That just seems really not a smart choice. And I just have trouble interpreting what the true nature of Lori's and Joseph's relationship is, how emotionally deep it is, because on the one hand they love each other and were considering having a child together, and that it was really devastating to not get to pursue that, but then also you're only gonna occasionally spend the night and we're gonna go out on dates, but that's it. What how do you go from considering essentially having a non-legal marriage and having children to that. Maybe somebody else that is a different style of polyamory can understand this, but I definitely can't. And I also want to thank Beducated again for sponsoring today's video, because if you want to avoid being the subject of a viral Reddit post, I recommend checking out some of their content on non-monogamy and sex more generally, because oh boy, is this confusing, and also could a lot of it have been avoided with some proper education. So go ahead, check Beducated out again. It's code EVLupine at checkout for 60% off, and the link's down below. I do have to wonder how people are together so long term and they already have kids and they don't know how their partner feels about having more kids. Like, yeah, it's sad when you want to have more children and your partner doesn't, but like, a baby is a two yeses situation, and a lot of couples go through disagreements about family size, especially once they face the reality of actually having kids. I do think taking a year is a really, really smart decision, though, because that gives everyone time to cool off, get used to the new arrangement, and really make sure this is the next step they want to take. I'm still pretty wary and raising my eyebrow at the, like, how could you not know it hurt me that, I wanted to have more kids despite us having literally half a dozen in the house already. But, it's not my life, and we're only getting one narrow version of what happened here. Based on the other comments, OP seemed aware early on in the relationship that she wanted to have a large family from the outset and was pretty aware of that, but didn't say what he said he originally envisioned himself wanting, or what he communicated to her, or when they all got committed as a group, like how that played into choosing family size. Because yeah, if you promise your spouse that you also want 10 kids and then you stop at 3, that's going to cause feelings, and it's on you for not talking about that enough, emotionally speaking. And also, if you're the person who says you want 10 kids originally, and then you agree to compromise on 6 in the household, or you agree that, okay, we're all done having kids, like, if you internally feel like that's not working for you anymore, you can't just, like, silently seethe about it and then, like, be like, oh, you were supposed to be able to tell that it upset me that, we couldn't have more kids and that we decided our family was complete. Like, and also, just because you're hurt over not having a bigger family doesn't mean that having a bigger family is the smart choice. Like, I don't know, maybe the philosophy is different when you grow up in a really big family, but I feel like if your house is already full and you have a lot of kids already and not everyone is on board with more, you shouldn't, like, kind of force another one in there because you just want one because, like, but why does also, and maybe this is hard for people to identify once they already have kids or even before they have kids, why do you want to have another kid? Like, if you already have several, like she has like at least 3, right? If you already have 3, what's the 4th gonna do for you that the other 3 aren't doing? Like, is it just like not wanting to say goodbye to that phase of your life because you're only like 33 and you thought you'd have a couple more years of having kids? That kind of gives fundamentalist vibes, to be honest with you, not wanting to leave the season of life of childbearing. That's what my instinct is. There are a lot of polyamorous people that come from a fundamentalist background, especially ex-Mormons, and a lot of them are used to having a very, very, very big family, and so when they don't have that as adults, it can cause a lot of self-worth feelings. It can cause just a lot of feelings in general about, like, not living up to your own previous life expectations, even if you can't really identify why you want more versus just the number. Like, oh, it's one thing if you have, like, 4 girls in a row and you want to try for a boy because, you want to have a boy. Like, kind of still a crappy reason, I think, but it's better than just like, oh, well, I just like the number 4 better. Like, what is the logic? I want to know. Still not a great reason to have a kid, but I don't know. Maybe people who have big families don't always have great reasons for having a ton of kids. Not really my wheelhouse of expertise. I don't come from a big family, so I don't know what that's about. And there's one more little part of this update here. Quote, ANDI, on the other hand, is a problem. She is still furious with me over all of this and isn't showing any signs of backing down. In a way, it's understandable. She's had a sexual/emotional relationship with Joseph since she was 21 years old and is the mother of his child, so she was really looking forward to him becoming part of her family and was deeply hurt by my rejection. Kyle told me last night that she had even talked about leaving the family over it and moving in with Joseph, but that it was just angry talk. Right now, I can only get cold stares and slammed doors from her. Ma'am, you are nearly in your mid-30s and you have children in the house. You cannot go around slamming doors like a teenager, and Andy, babe, baby, sweetheart, baby girl. You also cannot use a partner's relationship with someone else as a wedge to get what you want from them. If what Andy wanted was more time with Joseph, she should have had that conversation with him and the family, not used Lori's relationship with him as a proxy for getting her own needs met. If having a kid with someone is a two yeses situation, moving a whole adult human being into a house with several kids is an all yeses situation. Sorry, Andy, that's what you agreed to when you got into this relationship, and what you agreed to again when you agreed that Joseph moving in was going to be temporary to help him out. I don't know if she pre-planned this thing where she envisioned, I'm gonna say it's temporary, I'm gonna agree to that, but once they're around Joseph enough, they'll come around. They're not gonna kick a guy out of the house, and I'm gonna get my needs met in this really sneaky backhanded way. I did not see Andy being the dark horse problem in this. Maybe I should have seen it coming, but also, Andy, what are you doing? Why do you want this man so much? Why would you leave the rest of your family and presumably your other children to live with this one guy in an apartment? What is going on, Andy? If that is not an example of protest behavior, I don't know what would be. That is some grade A, top tier, top shelf protest behavior if I've ever heard it. Just get a grip, please. You're hurting yourself and your family, okay, Andy? But Andy rant over. One little piece here. I really don't know how this is going to resolve itself, but for the sake of our daughter, I'll never stop trying. I stuck her in the middle of a fight between the fathers of her two children, two men she loves, and she's furious at me for even forcing the choice. It may take some time for both of us to work through it. Kyle is a bit of a different story. He admitted that he knew Joseph and I didn't get along and apologized to me for not talking to me sooner to make sure I was okay with everything. He apparently blames himself for the arguing, thinking that it was his job to run interference since Joseph was originally his friend. And I'm a life partner to his family. I told him not to worry about it because it was my fault that I didn't bring it up myself. Then we had a beer. So, with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I'd like to thank you all for your insights, commentary, and for putting up with my venting. Hosting this here gave me a place to mentally work through some of these issues before I broach them with my family, and probably saved me from making some very ugly comments and choices. I genuinely appreciate reading your responses, and I know that Lori found many of your comments eye-opening and insightful as well. She loves the thought that we're a, quote, tribe. Because someone requested it, we may come back and do an AMA at some point about the emotional and family dynamics of living in a large poly/tribal household, but we need to finish working through the current situation first. So, side note, I'm not going to touch on how calling your polyamorous family a tribe is a bad idea, but, I guess that's it. A bittersweet ending, to say the very least. Almost everyone got an amenable solution except for Andy. And, with her door slamming, I don't really necessarily think that her needs should be the first priority until she gets to maybe a little bit of a calmer place to begin with. I don't really love that Andy seemingly secretly hoped to use Joseph's injury as a way to wedge him into the family, and that she didn't include people that she is already committed to via ceremony in her conversations about wanting to bring another whole person into the household. Why would... If you're being sneaky about it, you know that it's wrong, right? And judging by the original reactions on r/polyamory, it seems like everyone more or less felt the same way about this that I did, that it was an example of a potentially horrible situation that could have exploded like a bomb, but didn't. And it's definitely not an example of a perfectly healthy polycule that never ever has problems, but it is an example of how people can and do work through very big, kind of dangerous situations emotionally. Imperfectly, yes, with lots of big feelings, yes, but things can turn out more or less all right with a certain frame of mind and some commitment. I've already made the comparison once here so far to a monogamous divorce. Something like 40% of first-time marriages end in divorce. Most long-term relationships just don't work out, and some of them don't end but change dramatically regardless. And it's not about just avoiding divorce at all costs or avoiding change, but how you handle it when you decide you need to change your relationship. Do you talk about it like adults, or do you start breaking your soon-to-be ex's collectibles that you've always hated? Divorce isn't bad just because it makes some people bitter or they fight in court for years. Just like polyamory isn't bad, even if some people have fights about big picture issues while having children. All couples do that at some point. Again, just on Reddit alone, there are thousands of stories of monogamous people imploding their whole lives with cheating, gambling, conflict with in-laws, or disagreement about work or how to raise kids or split the finances. But no one ever blames the monogamy when those things happen. They blame the people trying to do the relationship because that's where the problem is. It's in the people. And ANDI isn't acting immature because she's polyamorous. She's acting immature because that's how she is. And I'm sure Reddit totally gets this, right? They definitely see that this worked out mostly okay, and the problem is the polyamory, but the same communication and awareness issues that plague nearly every married relationship. And that polyamorous people aren't the only folks who treat kids like tokens, and it's more of our collective cultural attitude about family size and child rearing and how kids are basically there to exist to validate you as opposed to being whole, independent human beings themselves. Nah, of course not. That didn't happen because instead we got a lot of comments like, literally every child in the scenario is wrecked. I don't even have anything against poly relationships, but holy hell, are none of these adults capable of basic responsibilities, boundaries, or common sense. And none of them sound particularly adept at birth control methods up to this point. Good luck, I guess. And the all-time classic, I'm very thankful I've never had the urge to want a poly relationship because every one of them seems to be a train wreck. Alongside a chaser of approximately 500 people all going, polyamory sounds exhausting. I'm like, where do I even begin? Clearly, in the post, they talk about using oral birth control and condoms, and they would have to stop doing those things to get pregnant again, so they do use birth control. It may just have been in previous arrangements that they didn't necessarily care who the father was at the time, which is outside of the norm, sure, but not inherently wrong either. And also condoms break and fail like pretty regularly with routine everyday use. And yeah, polyamory can be exhausting in times of strife, but so can a monogamous relationship where you spend every weekend venting to your girlfriends about how inept and lazy your layaway boyfriend is, and eventually they all want to push him off a cliff to get you to shut up about it. Tedium is far from solely in the domain of polyamory, and Reddit isn't exactly going to hear about perfectly healthy poly relationships because why would they be posting for advice? And even if they just were talking about how their relationships worked, they'd be accused of bragging. Classic selection bias. I've been polyamorous for almost a decade, and while I've heard third hand about messy poly breakups before, I've never been in a relationship that ended because of the polyamory. It's always boiled down to the same everyday life conflict and incompatibility reasons that monogamous people go through. I think in this situation, though, we can definitely critique how everyone involved seems to think about kids, at least based on how the OP talks about it, and that does not bode well, but that doesn't necessarily mean the kids have a bad home life. Joseph talked about how happy that his kid was in that household. Also just look at how uber monogamous fundies treat their kids. I don't think polyamory is the problem so much as a lot of people have kids and are not really interested in treating them as autonomous human beings, and they prefer to think of them as trophies. That is an issue that transcends religion and relationship style. And at the risk of just seeming like I'm 100% defending these people because they're polyamorous and so I'm invested in it, I would not want to be involved in this polycule, this arrangement. I would not want to be involved with these people in any way. It sounds very messy, way too involved, way too all on top of each other. Not my thing in the slightest. And I do think, obviously, as I've talked about, there are lots of obvious basic communication issues, willingness to have hard conversations. I think there was a fair amount of assuming going on in the responses to this. I saw a lot of people assuming that they were just shouting this down the hallway at each other and having these very loud, obvious conversations to the point that it would be affecting the children. Again, 40% of first-time marriages end in divorce. Almost all of those marriages are monogamous people. when people are having relationship conflict while married, while having kids, like some people handle it in a way that is like very obvious to the kids involved and it affects them, and some people do it totally behind closed doors and you never ever know about it. And that doesn't, again, have anything to do with necessarily the underlying relationship style so much as how the people involved handle conflict. I would imagine they have some kind of separate time or space for like adult only conversation. They keep the kids fairly separated from that. Like, that is not an impossible thing to do while polyamorous. Plus, in order to have this many adults with presumably at least some of their own rooms and also kids, like, it's going to be a big house. For all we know, they have like an adults only basement area where like all of the conflict gets resolved and like the kids are like maybe watched by somebody who is not like in the conversation, or maybe it happens while kids are at school or activities. Like, you know, who knows, right? There's things that could happen there. It doesn't mean just because there is conflict, the kids are being like traumatized by it. And honestly, I think even to a certain extent, like kids should see their parents or adult figures in conflict. Maybe not to this extent or this particular example of it because of how it involves like sex and babies and everything. But like, I think kids seeing parents have conflict and resolve that conflict in a healthy way where they reconnect and heal afterwards, that's actually really important for kids' development, to see that ability that adults can have to process something really intense, sit with their emotions, and then work through it and come back together. Because if kids never see their parents have conflict, like, that is maybe not as bad as parents constantly fighting, but it does stunt kids' development in terms of that sort of interpersonal relationship skill. And they're not necessarily going to see that at school or with teachers or stuff, right? So that's just something to note there as well. But in any case, this has been a very long story. I hope that you all enjoyed this and learned something. I think that, you know, the rote responses you see to stories like this about like, you know, this is so bad for kids, you know, this is why polyamory never works, I could never do polyamory, it's exhausting, just like over and over and over and over again. Like, the only people I saw who kind of like pointed out the fact that all of the same crap happens in monogamy were like other polyamorous people, and I think we're very much still in a place where if you were to survey people, which you haven't even gotten to that point yet, if like, you know, some pollster did a poll of Americans about like, what's your feeling about polyamory, the vast majority of people would feel like neutral to negative about it, especially the older the people it surveyed get. And it's because of the fact that most of the exposure to things like this is through like Reddit stories and like viral, like cringy scenarios, and they don't really see the everyday people. And almost, it does kind of remind me of veganism weirdly in a way, where like, yeah, you would have a very bad view of veganism if your only exposure to it was like weird PETA ads and people talking about how they gave up veganism because they needed to eat eggs to like have a healthier skin or something. Like, yeah, if all the stories you hear about veganism are ex-vegans talking about how terrible the diet was, you're going to miss out on the 90% of vegans who are just like going about their day, doing their veganism, having a fun time, not complaining about it because it's working for them. And if they did talk about how veganism is working for them, you know what that's called? Proselytizing. And people hate that, especially in America. Oh my God, they hate feeling like they're being pressured into doing something that they're not currently doing, even when it's literally just somebody talking about how their life experience is. So that's another factor to consider here as well. So in summary, these people sound, you know, like a handful, and they need to really work in their communication, but I think their problems are not indicative of an issue at the core of polyamory, so much as a bunch of people that maybe don't have the level of relationship experience you to have these more complex conversations. But even with that, they were still able to compromise. And compromise doesn't mean everyone gets to have their perfect best ending, but it works out in a way that people can accept. And that's what's really important. But I'm rambling. I want to hear your thoughts about this one in a comment down below. If you did enjoy this video, please let me know by leaving a comment down below. If you would like to, if not already, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all different kink and BDSM related subjects, as well as polyamory relationship stuff like in this video right here. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best thing to do is with Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.